Good afternoon, students, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for signing up to be here this afternoon. We are so grateful that you saw it worth signing up. And you are in for a treat because today's speaker is our Dean of Student Success. And before I introduce her, again, I serve as an academic advisor, and I'm also an assistant professor in the Department of Academic Advisement and Student Development. And it's such an honor to have Dr. Rachel Finley Bowman, who I have already said she is the Dean of Student Success at Millersville University. She's also an Associate Provost for Academic Support Services at Millersville, in charge of quite a number of departments, including the library, including our academic advisement department, including experiential learning, first year programming. She's in charge of career and experiential learning, as I've said, and also civic and community engagement among some of the departments she gives oversight. So I would like you to give her a warm welcome. She is success, and she breathes success, and she wants you to succeed in Millersville. And it's such an honor to have her speak to us. Welcome, Dr. Finley Bowman.
Thank you so much. That was just such a wonderful welcome. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm very excited to speak with you this afternoon, and thank you both to Margaret and Anne for including me in your resiliency series. It's such an important piece of work, not only for the students, but again, to continue to create a culture of success, if you will, and a culture of positive learning here on our Millersville campus. So thank you so much for that. And yes, I am Rachel Finley Bowman. So I'm looking forward to our conversations this afternoon. We will be using the chat feature a little bit in the interim in our conversation, but more toward the end this afternoon. So please feel free to weigh in, and I'll give you some tips and sort of nudges along the way to consider some things that I'd love us to share out as we converse this afternoon. It probably would be helpful if you haven't muted yourself already, and even if you feel comfortable, you can sort of turn off your video as well. That might just sort of help us as we move through this afternoon in our conversations. So yes, the title of our conversation is Active Skill Building for Academic Success. And when I approached this topic, I really broke it down into sort of two major components. One, of course, is skill building, and the other is academic success itself. Right, and our emphasis will certainly be on the first, the foremost in terms of skill building. And we'll highlight several skills and some tips and ideas around continuing to build capacity in those skills rather. I should have a bit of a disclaimer here. While we'll have a fairly inclusive list, it is by no means an exhaustive list, right? This is really my interpretation. And so you might see some of my own biases and perspectives as, again, a longtime faculty member, a longtime faculty advisor, and an administrator in a 20-year plus career. So you'll definitely see some of those themes sort of resonating throughout my conversation. But I want to start really first with the idea of success, right? I want to start first with that. So success, this idea of how we define it, how we might think about it, success itself is a social construct, right? It is this idea that it is a very individualized concept. It's not something that necessarily has a one-size-fits-all definition, right? The definition will vary and won't necessarily be the same for everyone or the same for everyone at every stage of their life. For me, how I think about success, success is a dynamic concept, right? Something that is not static, but really something that's more fluid, something that really resonates with the season or stage of life that you're in, where you are in terms of your education, where you are in terms of your life, where you might be in terms of your professional career. And so thinking about that, thinking about this notion that success is dynamic, it led me to think about one of my favorite educators, a woman named Marva Collins. Marva Collins was an educator popular in the 1970s and 1980s. She has now since passed, but she was really known for her approach to education around the concept of individualized learning, right? This idea that, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all model, but that we really need to approach education from that individual lens. And in doing so, that's where her sort of concept or idea around success emerged, right? So take a moment and take a look at Marva's interpretation of how we achieve success. Just take a moment and let it resonate with you before I move on. So her idea that success doesn't come to you, but you go to it, right? So we're not just sitting here and sort of looking at our watch and saying, today I'm going to decide to be successful, right? It just doesn't happen that way, right? It is definitely a journey. It is definitely a decision that we make intentionally to have a goal or an objective, or think about a journey that we need to move forward on to attain some level of success, right? We are actively engaging and moving toward it, right? We are actively engaging and moving toward it. So the question then becomes, what skills do we need to have, right? Here's the skill building piece. What skills do we need to have to be able to move toward that, right? And here's this sort of framing question, right? And here's really the framing question. What does success look like to you? And what skills do we need to really get there, okay? And that's the framing question that I want us to be thinking about as we move forward in our conversation this afternoon. And it's something that I'll be coming back to time and again, but it's one I want you to begin to have resonating with you in your thought process. What does success look like to you? And what skills might you need to get there? Again, thinking about the Marva Collins quote. When we think about the skills we might need to get to our particular end goal in terms of success, I want you to be thinking about a skill building journey, right? How do we sort of go from point A to point B? And how do the skills that we amass help us, again, reach that goal of success, attain that goal of success? I have two main themes or two main components that will help us really in some ways categorize or define what those skill sets might look like. And two things really to remember about the skills process. One is, of course, that this is a very personal or personalized process. Again, just like with the social construct of success, success will not mean the same thing to every individual, right? Again, a very sort of specific interpretation of what that looks like. And so with that, the skills that you need along the way will be very individualized, okay? The second thing to think about is sustainability. That the skills that I am now amassing, are they sustainable in the sense of how am I approaching my journey and approaching my, again, desire to reach that success or that definition of success that I'm striving to meet. Because this journey really is, in essence, it's a lifelong process, right? We're never necessarily going to be mastering every skill that we're trying to attain around success, whether it's academic at this season of our life, or if you mirror it to or map it to your professional success that will come years later. So I want you to be thinking about this sort of lifelong process, thinking about the evolution of your skills journey, like I said, depending upon that season of life. For example, you know, for our first year students out there, our first semester freshmen who may be in our class today or in our conversation today, the skills that you're thinking about, how you're defining success, the journey you're thinking about is likely very different to maybe our upperclassmen or our seniors who might be on the Zoom call. Or again, thinking ahead to when you might be in graduate school or thinking ahead to when you're beginning your career. All of those things will begin to see some changes and we'll begin to see some adaptability depending upon, again, what your season of life is. So needs will vary based upon the individual. And of course, we should be thinking too about our own personality in terms of what is sustainable. And we'll continue to talk about that. So if we're thinking about we're going on a journey, if we're thinking about, again, we're going to success with our skills, I want to continue that visualization and think about then ultimately what we want to do in terms of skill building as we build that capacity is we're forging a toolkit, right? So we want to create a toolkit that is available to us, is usable, and will allow us to really rise to the challenges and meet the needs of whatever we may be, again, sort of facing when it comes to our academic journey, our academic programs, as the case may be, right? So we're thinking about how do we sort of forge that toolkit. Some of the pieces in that toolkit, again, will be sort of the building blocks, right? What will we actually put into that toolkit? And what will be some of the things, the sort of essential components, if you will, that will provide us with a foundation? Now, here is where I have this sort of inclusive list, right? Things that I've seen through my experiences as a faculty member, as a faculty advisor, that have been most, I think, useful for students when it comes to building those skills and sustaining those skills across that lifelong process, right? Across that lifelong process. So I'm going to go through each one here just briefly, and then we'll continue to talk about them in more detail. So organization and time management, these seem probably pretty top of mind when you think about active skill building or continuing to expand or master what might be sort of part of your toolkit, so to speak. So we'll mention some things around that. Increasing core capacities. Core capacities are really referencing those skills and competencies that you most readily see in things like your general education courses. So we'll talk a lot about those moving forward. We'll talk a little bit about stress reducers, right? That's an important skill to be able to reduce your stress, to take a break, right? To be able to sort of feel that you can relax, sort of move away from work itself. One of my favorites, building affinity networks, helping to sustain your self-motivation, setting some goals, and we'll talk about how we can sort of choose smaller goals to really sort of go big. And then we'll talk about some of the positive reinforcements in terms of our attitudes and aptitudes around a commitment to success, and then feeling confident, in our academic abilities as well as our academic choices. And those last two, again, are sort of a bit of those boosters that we oftentimes need, particularly when we're feeling a little bit more stress or a little bit anxiety sort of around trying to reach the success goal, whatever that may be. Because there will certainly be bumps on our journey, as we'll talk about. So thinking ahead to sort of the end of our conversation here in just the next, sort of 30 minutes or so, I want to think ahead to a bit of a debrief. And I want to go back to our framing question, which of course I'll bring back again toward the end. But 2 points that I want you to think about, and I'll have you put them in the chat, not now, but at the end when I let you know that we're ready to sort of share out an information share. But I want to get these on your radar now. So as we're conversing through and talking, again, these are continuing to resonate, just like that framing question. They're continuing to resonate in your mind. So what skill building strategies always work for you? Like, is there one sort of sage piece of advice where you're saying, maybe Rachel talked about it this afternoon, but gosh, here's one she didn't. And it's like, this is like, has been a game changer for me. And then I'd also like you to share what's been a takeaway from our conversation. Is there something as we're moving through here this afternoon that has really been useful for you and you could really see yourself using, or at least sort of experimenting and trying? So I want you to begin to think about this as we move through. You might want to sort of jot down a few notes or again, a thought or two as we progress, because we'll come back to this at the end as a group. So let's take the first of these building blocks, right? Organization. Organization. Are you getting a visual in your mind, right? What does an organized person look like, right? What does an organized person look like, right? Well, organization is definitely a learned behavior, right? And it's often, too, a social construct, just like we're seeing around success. Because what we might define as success for one person may not be true of another. And it's the same when it comes to organization, right? It's the same when it comes to organization, right? So I put up for you here sort of two choices, two images of an organized, sort of person or an organized approach, right? We have choice A that has sort of the to-do list, right? Showing here the computer, all the beautiful color coding, right? All of those kind of things. And then we have choice B. It's a desk that's sort of full of piles. There's some kind of open container, sort of an open binder, right? So if you would for me, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. If you would for me, sort of get that image in your mind and using the chat, just share out which to you, as you sort of look at these choices, which appears to be organized. Do you have some thoughts? Is it choice A? Is it choice B? Can you give me your thoughts? And then we'll talk for a second. I'll give you about 30 more seconds. If we want to share, anybody else wants to share? Yeah, very good. And I think if we can see from the chat, right, we have, I wouldn't say necessarily sort of a divided opinion, but we're definitely recognizing that there's not a one size fits all, right, to organization. So can choice A be organized? Yes. Can choice B be a best practice in organization? Absolutely. And a lot of you talked about it's both, but for me, it would be one or the other, okay? So I chose these two particular examples because choice A, I'm very familiar with because it's not what I do, but it's what my husband does, right? And we sort of live by it in a way. Everything's sort of color coded, everything, is done digitally, and we see reminders sort of go off, when anything's happening, there's a sports schedule, or there's, whatever we need to sort of make in terms of a practice or a bill paid, whatever it is, right, to organize our household. Me, I chose choice B because I'm the pile person, right? I am the pile person, the list person. Seemingly it looks disorganized to some people, but it really gives me that sort of sense of comfort and organization. And I'm also, again, I love using my little sort of notebook, my little sort of tabs, right? Here's like the reminder on flu shots, right? So you can see all of those things that, again, give me a sense of ways to organize my thoughts. And then I get a tremendous sense of satisfaction being able to, again, sort of cross off those things that I was able to sort of accomplish or meet in terms of those specific tasks, right? So again, there isn't necessarily a right answer to what is supposed to be the most organized or who's, there's only one vision of it. But the most important takeaway is to find a system, right? Find a system that is certainly low cost, right? Because you can find ones that have all these sort of beautiful like bells and whistles and sticky notes and all kinds of things that are very expensive. And same things if you find a digital system or an app, same kind of thing. They can be really expensive and it's not sustainable, right? Especially if it's not user-friendly, especially if it's not realistic in terms of how it meets your needs or your goals or your personality, which is, what is your organizational threshold, right? So for some of you who are very definitive in the chat about A versus B, it was very clear, like you needed the color coding and that sort of worked for you. You see the beautiful calendar, that's your threshold, right? Versus the others who are like me, the pile people, who, again, that sort of matches our personality. So find something that really works for you, because if you don't, it won't be sustainable, right? And then create the routine around it and build in those reminders. Because the real sort of testimony to a successful system that will help you organize in terms of a skill set is that you're not missing deadlines, right? You're not running late to appointments, you're not running late to classes, but that it's allowing you to work smarter, right? And that's the real goal around, organizing yourself and building skills that will allow you to sort of organize more readily. Related to organization, of course, is our friend time management, right? And time management is really hard. I think if we just had more hours in the day, we'd be able to organize more effectively, right? More effectively. But we want to sort of talk first about the biggest sort of barrier or the biggest threat to time management, and that's procrastination, right? And that's procrastination. And we have to determine in a lot of ways why we procrastinate. What are those patterns or those reasons that sort of push us into procrastination? And again, there you see sort of my friend, Ziggy right here, again, doing my lists, right? Sort of recognizing what we need to do or what I should have done the day before, didn't sort of get there, right? Procrastinating a bit. Or a lot of us maybe feeling that synergy around, the panic-induced deadline because I've waited too long. And we find that the reasons why we see students procrastinate so much, it's not because they're task averse or they don't want to do it or they're lazy. It's usually the opposite, that we tend to be high performers, we tend to be perfectionists, we're fearful of a negative outcome. And so we just, sort of defer, we put it off until it gets to the point where, we have to do it now or it will never work. So we need to determine why and begin to change those patterns of behavior. And that's often the first step if you're finding that procrastination is an issue for you around your time management. If you're having difficulty, really sort of coming to grips with that, or if you need more intense, support or again, some scaffolds to help to determine how we can move away and change those behaviors, I'm going to continue sort of the first of many, shout outs that I'm going to give is, think about enlisting some extra support. We have tremendous success coaches here on campus. And again, you could check out Bill Daly today. Ryan is sort of advertising, right, for success coaches. So don't be afraid to reach out, have a quick meeting to sort of talk things through. That can really be helpful to give you some new ideas if you need something, a little bit more in terms of deeper support. So I would definitely encourage you to consider some of those extra supports and outlets. I would also say when you're thinking about time management, really think about a disciplined approach that would allow you to create a schedule or a routine, that allows you to block some time. And one of, I think the more famous or the more sort of tried and true best practices is something called the Pomodoro technique. Francesco Cirillo, who's an entrepreneur and business person over the last sort of 3 decades, has really put the Pomodoro technique in play. And you can read through what it looks like. I'm not going to go through sort of each one, but I'll summarize for you. It basically creates for you a timed and sort of framed technique to be able to work smarter. And it builds in specific blocks of time to get a task or a series of tasks completed. And then once you've done a certain chunk or a certain set, then it builds in some rewards and it builds in some breaks to allow you to do that. This gives you sort of the straight sort of overview of Pomodoro, but you can do it really sort of on your own. I mean, you can tailor this for your own specific and individual needs and really make it work for you. I use Pomodoro and I have had my students use Pomodoro, but oftentimes they're not as sort of rigid in terms of like setting the timer and doing some of the things that Pomodoro, sort of first initiates. Maybe when they first start practicing it, but then like I said, you want to be more personalized and sustainable in your choices around skill building, and then you might modify it to make it work for you. The whole sort of technique is named after sort of this old-fashioned timer that was popular in the 1970s and 1980s, and it's just like this little Pomodoro tomato timer that you often were used in kitchens. And you could set it from there, but you can use your phone to set the timer as well. But the idea here is blocking out or chunking out time to allow you to have a specific dedicated hour or smaller blocks if needed to allow you to complete your tasks. And by scheduling in that time, it allows you to create that routine to be sure that your work is indeed getting done. But of course, do what works for you and make sure that it's something that can be sustainable, not just for today or for this class that you're taking, but really something that's going to work for you over a semester or a series of semesters, right? And then lastly, I would just say before we pivot from time management, don't forget to build in some rewards. I'm a huge proponent of this, is that you sort of reward yourself for getting the hard work done, particularly if you're modifying Pomodoro for your own needs that maybe you're building in. So you're doing maybe your toughest work first or your most challenging work first, and then you're moving on to something else. But build in those treats, that exercise, watch a show, spend some time, with your friends on social media, whatever it is that just sort of gives you that release, or that stress release. Increasing your core capacities, and there's a lot here for you to potentially unpack, right, as we're thinking about these. But these are, again, ones that I have noticed that have been areas for skill building under this sort of rubric of a core competency or core capacity, not just now, in the pandemic, but also pre-pandemic, and I would definitely sort of expect post-pandemic as well. And so we'll just go through these sort of briefly to get a sense of, how we can continue to practice these and where to seek assistance when we're, again, wanting to continue to enhance our practice. So communication and public speaking skills, these, of course, is really a lifelong skill set, something that you'll continue to work on throughout, your entire career in academics, but then as you move into the workforce as well. No matter what your chosen career path will be, you have to be able to communicate with people at the sort of through an interpersonal and intrapersonal connection, right? So this becomes really important. Public speaking often gives people, nerves and anxiety. It's a skill that's really hard to manage, and you only get better with practice. And so that is something too that when we talk about, forming affinity networks, that would be something to practice with your peers and to be thinking about, how do I get better when it comes to that. Same thing with literacy and reading comprehension. The best way to become a better reader really is to continue to read. And I know, all things being equal, if there's not, some other outlying challenge, to continue to monitor that practice. And that's something that we see needs to continue and needs to be enhanced. If you're finding that you're struggling with that, again, I would encourage you to talk to your faculty advisor, to your success coach, or even learning services if you need some support around reading comprehension or around your literacy skill set, if you're finding that that's, something that's perhaps not as strong as you would want it to be. When it comes to writing skills, again, here's another, this sort of top layer of core capacities. These are, again, some of these lifelong skills that will never ever really be sort of done. They're always constantly evolving, and writing skills for sure. And I think for all of you, I would put sort of a shout out to our University Writing Center, which is a tremendous, sort of a tremendous service on our campus to students. And if you're not really using it on a regular basis, I would encourage you to do so. One thing that we find in academia is that we almost have everything that we write sort of reviewed by a peer. Anything that I've ever have published has been reviewed multiple times, by a peer, and I've gotten some really great constructive feedback. So even if you feel like you're a super strong writer, always having, some other kind of eye, some other kind of support on that can be really helpful. It just makes you even stronger. So I would encourage that you think about that around your skills in writing. Information literacy, again, making sure that we can navigate the information that's coming to us, and that's sometimes challenging, in this era of fake news, right, or perceived fake news. So we want to make sure that we're recognizing the information that we're getting, and especially if we're following, different news outlets on social media, if we're, again, sort of looking at all different kinds of ways that we're getting our information, whether it's through digital channels or sort of paper, textbooks and things, that we're being a critical consumer of the information that is coming towards us. And that's an important skill set to make sure that we continue to build and focus on. Critical thinking and problem solving, again, this is part of our general ed competencies here on campus. I bring in Zoom and email etiquette, again, because of the pandemic world that we're living in, making sure that we're recognizing our audience and understand sort of who we're speaking to, and we're tailoring our messaging to that audience so that we're always respectful, that we're always culturally responsive, and that's what sort of, connects into professionalism as well. Civic and social awareness, this sort of reminds me of, clearly of our EPIC values here on campus, that we want to, be just active and participatory citizens. We want to be aware of the world around us. And that's a skill that, we should be thinking about. And, for many of us, if we are, first year students here at Millersville, this might be the first time we're voting in an election, right? That we can, sort of do our ultimate civic duty. And so those kinds of things I think are really exciting. And those are skills that should also be top of mind for your academic success, because building in that awareness helps you, again, to have those available skills on that journey to success. And the last one that I want to talk about is teamwork. And I'm going to tease that one out here a little bit, because there are many facets to teamwork in terms of building a core capacity. One of which, of course, goes back to how do you build your own team, right? If you need, additional support for skill building, if you need additional support to get to that ultimate definition of success, how do you ask for it and accept it, right? How do you build those relationships? And maybe it's been a bit more of a challenge here because of COVID, right? Because of the pandemic, because of, again, remote experiences. But that's where, again, collaboration and cooperation becomes so essential, right? Reaching out, taking all of the opportunities, like coming to these kind of, sessions where you can meet and talk to people. And then when you are working as part of a team, don't forget that you are just, a key player as well, that you are an essential individual to that team. And don't forget to assert your voice. Don't sort of get lost in the work of the team too. So sort of balancing that relationship, how you build a team, how you become sort of part of a team, and how you become an essential player in that team. Stress reducers, right? So this building block that we want to sort of put in our toolkit as we skill build. And this is just, again, just a reminder, just like we talked about with time management, to build in those breaks, right? My favorite stress reducer is just like go outside, take a walk, right? Take a run, go exercise, doing yoga, Pilates, whatever it is that really gets you, sort of feeling motivated, or just, again, lets you decompress and just sort of strip away a bit of the pressures of what you've been working on. But I would also tell you here, think about what is sort of for you as a person is sustainable and really sort of fits to your personality. So again, if it's more that it just feels great to be able to go talk to somebody, or just, again, I can decompress on social media and just have some fun, that's great too. But I would just say too, be careful about things like, too much caffeine, too much junk food, because while they're fun in the beginning, they're not really sustainable to help you sort of reduce your stress, right? And they sometimes can exacerbate your stress, especially if you have a lot of caffeine and you can't sleep, right? I cannot probably overemphasize enough the power of a good night's sleep, right? Particularly not just in terms of reducing your stress, but all the skills that we're talking about. If you have fresh brain power, that really is one of those things that sometimes makes you unstoppable, right? Because you're sort of, fired and ready to go when it comes to your academic program and your academic success. Affinity networks and self-motivation, right? An affinity network is really sort of building that team or building those connections to people who share what matters most to you, right? And oftentimes that really helps when it's people in a similar major who are going through a similar class, who are going through a similar experience, right? So for the students, for example, in University 103, right? There's your affinity network. You're all sort of first year, first semester freshmen. You're all going through the same experiences, sort of coming to college, in a pandemic. You'll be forever bonded in some of those, in some of those measures and in some of those connections. But you can also use each other to continue to bolster your self-motivation for getting your work done, for doing all the things that you need to do, for reaching out when you need, help and support. And so you can't underestimate, what that looks like when you're building a team around you of people who are like-minded. Now, this does not mean that you don't want to open yourself up to diverse experiences, right? And to different cultures. No. This is about, again, building support academically within your major, where, again, if you're moving through and you're all experiencing organic chemistry together, you're all going to get it if you're supporting each other, right? So it may start as a study group, and then it could emerge into a larger network of support, right? And that can include peer mentors and professional mentors as well. That can include co-curricular support, any club that you're in, if you're on a sports team, if you're in a living learning community. All of these things can help to continue to bolster that self-motivation to succeed. And then I would lastly say in all of this, is find a champion. Find somebody who really supports and believes in you and can really, again, when you need it, bolster some of that confidence if need be. Then setting goals, thinking about, how do we begin to set goals? And I would say here, as you read through, 2 or 3 takeaways. We want to think small to go big, right? Think about chunkable objectives that you can, again, meet and strive to do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a semester basis, so that you're not sort of getting overwhelmed by sort of the larger ideas that may seem daunting, and then you might procrastinate and just, again, sort of put those off. So think about going small to eventually reach, the end of the journey, and that success. Again, your work will definitely equal your outcome, but it has to be sustainable and attainable. Don't ever fear setbacks. There will be setbacks. We have all failed, and people who tell you they've never failed aren't telling you the truth, right? We've all failed, right? We've all made a misstep. That's the natural sort of learning process, right? But it's how we deal with those things that is the measure of resiliency. The whole point, right, of our series is like getting that grit to know that we can move forward and asking for some good constructive feedback so we can continue to grow, right? And this is where we sort of land in this notion of a very sort of positive attitude, a positive commitment to our own success, right? To our own success. And that's where, again, a champion, an affinity network can really help to, again, continue to support that positive notion, that positive, output or vision around success. But it really starts with you as an individual. You're determining sort of your own future and your own results, right? So you might think about, what's my culture of learning? Am I more of a visual learner? Am I more of an auditory learner? Am I more kinesthetic? I have to get up and moving. Am I sort of a version of all three, a combination of all three? And that can help you in how you approach how you're sort of studying in your classes, how you might talk to your faculty member, your professors, about how you can sort of look at your classes yourself. And that allows you to feel more confident, right, and feel committed to your learning as well. But I would also encourage you to go a little bit deeper than beyond just sort of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And introduce you, if you haven't heard already, think about your intelligences and your strengths, right? So Howard Gardner, who is a psychologist, developmental psychologist coming out of Harvard, came up with a theory that basically said, the old theory is that we had one sort of general intelligence. We all sort of looked the same way. We all sort of learned the same way. We all sort of thought the same way. And that's not really true, right? There's actually a series of multiple intelligences based upon, what our interests are, where our skill sets are, where our natural sort of aptitudes and talents are, okay? And so how it breaks out is, as Gardner theorized, sort of 9 intelligences, okay? 9 different ones that really sort of characterize where our strengths rest, our aptitudes rest as learners. Now, in traditional education, especially K-12, the emphasis is certainly on linguistic, right? The writing, the communication, all the things that we were talking about under core capacities, as well as the logical and mathematical, right? As well as the logical and mathematical. So these 2 tend to be the most emphasized, and the other 7, perhaps not so much. Where Gardner makes the argument, makes the theory, that there should be sort of equal relevance given to the 9, and that we should be, as educators, championing these kinds of intelligences in our students. So as you take a few minutes and you can sort of look at this, and you can certainly come back when we record, and I can share out the PowerPoint as well, you can sort of see where you might fit in this. You can also, if you just Google in Gardner's multiple intelligences, there's quizzes that you can take online. So if you haven't done this before, you can find out where you maybe sort of naturally rest, where your affinity is. And that can sort of help you then focus too on how you want to continue to build your skills, because you're going to know how you begin to sort of learn best and how you're most productive, okay? And then in line with that is Clifton's Strengths Finder, right? Strength-based education. And I know for a lot of you, you took the Strengths Finder quiz during freshman orientation or first year orientation, and you found, again, where some of your strengths rest. And Clifton is just sort of one of the strengths assessments that you can take. Again, just like with Gardner's intelligences, there's a number of approaches that you can take a look at. But really here, I want us to be thinking about strength-based approaches and what that means for us in terms of skill building. And the key assumption here is that every student has unique talents. You have a unique talent, right? Your greatest source, your greatest strength rather, your greatest strength is a source for the greatest growth, right? So where you are naturally strong, that's where you're going to see the greatest growth. And we're not going to be emphasizing sort of weaknesses or deficiencies, but thinking about what your talents are and how do we sort of build the skills around those so that maybe the ones underneath that need improvement can be sort of lifted when your entire skill building capacity is lifted as a whole, okay? And then lastly, of course, thinking about how does all of this relate to how we embrace our own confidence to be able to move forward, to know that we're going to be meeting those success goals that we've defined for ourselves. And then perhaps most importantly is to always celebrate, our successes when we achieve them, whether micro or whether macro, that we're taking the time to do that, right? That we're taking the time to do that, okay? So now we're coming toward the end of our time together. So I want to have some time for questions and for dialogue, but I want to come back, as I promised, to our circling question, our framing question rather. What does success look like and what will you need to get there, okay? So in thinking about that, in the chat, if you would, just like I asked you at the very beginning here, can you leave a tip and share a takeaway? So what skill building strategies always work for you? And then what takeaway might you try, right? What skill building strategies work for you and what takeaway might you try? And in doing that, guess what we're doing? We're going to fill our own toolkit, right? Based upon our Zoom session together. And then once the recording is shared out, you can go back in and you can take a look at what, again, could be foundational for creating our own toolkit to move forward to, again, enhance our skills as we're moving toward success, right? So I'll let this up here for a minute just so you can see, and then I'll stop sharing in a minute or two to see if we have any questions or additional comments. So again, what skill building strategies always work for you? Something you've used for a long time and you want to share out and let everybody in on your secret. And then what takeaway might you try from today? What did you hear today that was really resonating with you, or you think that, again, it might be useful as you approach? So as you're adding your ideas in the chat, I will just say, again, thank you for our time. I know we're sort of coming to the end here. I do want to share my contact information. If you have questions or you'd like to follow up or you'd just like to chat, I'd love to talk with you. You can reach out at my email, studentsuccessdean@Millersville. Don't be shy and don't be afraid to say hello. And then, of course, I just have my selected references there for you to use as well. Okay. Well, then I would thank everybody for their time today and for their participation. I enjoyed the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Finley Bowman. We are so thrilled to have had you with us today. And the best part of all is that you're on our campus. And so I say to all the students and everyone participating, don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Finley Bowman, as she's a great resource and great source for us here at Millersville. Thanks to everyone who joined today. Just a reminder that we do have another session in 2 weeks, October 21st at 12 noon, again with our guest from University of Oklahoma, who's going to talk even more about building resilience. Each one of these workshops brings us a new perspective and some new ideas to put into, as Dr. Finley Bowman said, our toolkit. So we're building our toolkit, all of us together, especially in these challenging times of COVID. So again, Dr. Finley Bowman, thank you for being with us. And to everyone who joined us, thanks for being with us today. Hope to see you again in 2 weeks from today at 12 noon. Take care. Bye-bye.